Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
we started this process at ground zero.
Chicago Public School students are set to head back to the classrooms tomorrow after days of canceled classes. We have the latest on the teachers union's labor action and the district's proposal.
We must find a way to pass these voting rights bills.
President Biden pushes for voting rights, but will it pass in the divided Senate? Illinois Congress members weigh in.
I, Emanuel Chris Welch.
I, Emanuel Chris Welch.
Illinois House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch reflects on his first year in that role.
What keeps me going is the news itself. There's nothing like a fresh story.
Longtime radio news anchor Pat Cassidy marks his last day on the air. He reflects on 51 years behind the microphone.
The third and fourth are da-da-da-da-da.
And how to write the perfect limerick. A local author of a new children's book explains. But first, some of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot announces she has tested positive for COVID-19. The mayor made the announcement in a statement saying, quote, "Earlier today, I tested positive for COVID-19. I'm experiencing cold-like symptoms, but otherwise feel fine, which I credit to being vaccinated and boosted. I will continue to work from home while following the CDC guidelines for isolation." The news came less than 24 hours after holding a City Hall news conference where Lightfoot spoke without a mask. Lightfoot announced an agreement had been reached with the Chicago Teachers Union to allow Chicago students to return to in-person classes. And we'll have more on the school's announcement in just a bit. Chicago's COVID test positivity rate is at 18.9%, down from 21% the week before. Hospitalization rates remain at the highest they've been, still with about 90% of ICU beds occupied. Chicago's Public Health Commissioner says that overall, though, data is showing signs of progress and the city could be reaching the peak of the Omicron surge, but she adds that it is too soon to tell.
I am feeling good about the fact that potentially we are seeing at least some slowing of increase, but we do need some more days of data to feel more sure about the direction things are heading. I think there's a good chance this will be over 5,000 again. The good news is that if it's not 7,000 and 10,000 and 12,000 and going from there.
Meanwhile, Illinois public health officials report over 28,000 new COVID cases. That's about 8,000 more reported than yesterday, and 92 additional deaths. The state's seen more than 2,488,000 COVID cases since the pandemic began, with 28,660 total deaths. Also, a new hospitalization record was set with more than 7,000 Illinois hospital patients currently infected with the virus. A Chicago treatment center for substance use disorders is filing a federal discrimination lawsuit against the village of Itasca for rejecting the creation of a new center. Access Living, representing Haymarket Center, says Itasca government officials have no basis for denying the center's zoning application.
It then ultimately denied Haymarket's zoning application, despite Haymarket having satisfied all zoning requirements through more than 35 public hearings and an onerous 2-year process. These actions were intentionally discriminatory, arbitrary, capricious, without basis, and unreasonable.
And up next, the latest on Chicago Public School students returning to the classroom, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And Chicago students are set to return to the classroom tomorrow. This after Chicago Public Schools canceled 5 days of classes amid a labor action by the Chicago Teachers Union in which teachers and staff refused to work in person as COVID cases surged. The union's elected delegates approved a proposal last night, and rank-and-file teachers are expected to vote on the deal this week. Joining us now with the latest is Chicago Teachers Union Vice President Stacey Davis Gates. We did invite a representative from CPS to join us tonight, but we're told that no one is available. Stacey, welcome back. So first, we know that the House of Delegates voted to return to the classrooms this week, that your proposal is headed to the full rank-and-file membership this week. Really quick, when can we expect your rank-and-file to vote on this?
We are in the process of voting for it now. I left the all-member meeting to talk to you and your audience. So we are in the process of continuing meetings, unpacking what it means, answering questions, giving examples of how it would be implemented in school communities. And we expect something this week.
This week, so Friday at the latest.
Sure, yes.
Okay. How do you feel about the agreement that was reached at the bargaining table?
Well, you know, to be perfectly fair, it's not just the agreement. We've been doing this since March 2020. If you remember, Brandis, the governor was the responsible party in March of 2020. The mayor said even then with her doctor that she did not see the need to switch to remote learning. And she has held steadfast to that position. What's even more disappointing, throughout this process, we found out through her CEO that they never intended to negotiate a safety agreement. And that's a bit discouraging, considering that there was never a plan in place to make sure that we got as many children as possible vaccinated, their family members, that we signed folks up for testing to make sure that we can keep things at bay. They continue to balk at a metric that tells us if it's safe or unsafe. We see schools across Chicagoland flipping to remote because they have to, not because they want to, not because that's the thing to do, but because the lack of safety because of this variant provides for such a move.
But Stacey, the agreement that your members are going to look at this week, I think you mentioned in your CTU press conference last night, you know, you moved the ball. While maybe this is not the deal you wanted, this is the deal that you believe is worth presenting to your members.
Well, the deal has two things that I think are important to have. It has guardrails for safety, and it has accountability for members. One of the pieces that has been very tough for members and for families, quite frankly, to deal with is the disconnectedness of contact tracing from the school community. Now, contact tracing happens at the local level of the building, meaning the people in the building have skin in the game, and communications can go out faster. The notifications can be more thorough. That has been a problem. I think another thing is that we finally have a metric. This particular metric baselines the calamities that we saw both at Park Manor and Carnegie in the last few weeks. So it doesn't have everything that school districts just outside of Chicago have, quite frankly, but they also have leadership in those spaces that are clear about working with families and educators and not making the people who are in the school communities expendable.
So just 63%, though, of your delegates voted to approve this proposal. What have you heard from the teachers who felt like this was not enough?
You know, you hear a lot of anxiety. Listen, this is not our first battle. You know, in 2019, we had a huge battle to make sure that we would have nurses at every single school community. That doesn't happen until 2024. That being said, we're in the middle of a pandemic where a school nurse would serve a very specific and important critical purpose in our school communities. But we have had these nonstop back and forth fights with the mayor of this city over common sense, practical, baseline safety measures. Our members literally took a 4-day hit to their paychecks to get face coverings for themselves and their students. That's pathetic.
And to that point, you know, last night Mayor Lightfoot said that she hoped that this would be the end of the COVID-related disputes between the union and the district, at least for this school year. Do you think this will be it?
Well, someone needs to tell COVID. I don't think that any member of the Chicago Teachers Union, I don't think any family wants, you know, COVID to continue to interrupt and destabilize our lives. And these variants, they have a mind of their own. They do what they want to do. And so that's part of this issue, is that our mayor keeps trying to bottom line a virus that this country, that this world has yet to get in check. And so we have to be in a position of flexibility to pivot in the ways that maximizes the greatest level of safety that we can in the face of this pandemic. Look, we've already lost almost 1 million people in this country. It behooves us to do all that we can. And it is disappointing that we had to fight for 4 days to get the baseline security that districts outside of Chicago provide because they care about the people in the building.
Now, last night at a news conference, this was after the House of Delegates took their vote, you took aim at the mayor. Here's a clip.
This mayor is unfit to lead this city, and she is on a one-woman kamikaze mission to destroy our public schools.
Stacey, do you think parents and the school communities can hope for an improved relationship between the city/CPS and the union?
I think a lot is being made over a relationship, and what should be, I think too much is being made of a relationship. I think what we have attempted to do, especially for the last 2 years, is provide assurances and accountability for the places in which we operate in order to keep the maximum amount of people safe. The fact that it has to be a fight to receive a face covering, a 4-day fight, I don't think that's the fault of our union and the many women and men who serve our city. That's not our bad. That is her bad. And I want to add, this mayor finds fault in the state's attorney, the Cook County Board president. She finds it in her city council. She finds it in the Illinois General Assembly. It's not just the Chicago Teachers Union. We have a crisis of collaborative leadership, and that one person cuts across the field with everyone.
All of that said, and amid all of this, Stacey, we have to ask, some have suspected you for a potential mayoral run in 2023. Any considerations there?
My consideration is making sure that the agreement that we hammered out is unpacked for our membership and for our families, and that we can implement it in a way that maximizes safety as best as we can, and that my 3 children, quite frankly, get to have a more stable school year so they too can get the best education from the Chicago public schools. That is my sole goal and focus at this moment. This has been a tough couple of years. COVID has, we've experienced COVID in my family. I've experienced COVID, at a very high level in my work. This hasn't been fun. And so right now I'm focused on continuing to serve our membership and giving Chicago students the schools they deserve.
Okay. Best of luck to you this week on the vote and the return to school. Stacey Davis Gates, thanks again for joining us.
Hey, thank you all.
And now to Paris with local members of Congress. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. President Joe Biden was in Georgia today pushing for voting rights bills and for eliminating the filibuster if Senate Republicans block the legislation. Take a look.
I believe that the threat to our democracy is so grave that we must find a way to pass these voting rights bills. Debate them, vote, let the majority prevail. And if that bare minimum is blocked, we have no option but to change the Senate rules, including getting rid of the filibuster for this.
And joining us now to talk about voting rights and much more are Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Chicago's North Side, Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, a Democrat from Moline, and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, a Democrat from Schaumburg. We invited all the Republicans in Illinois' congressional delegation to join our conversation tonight, and none accepted. But we do thank you all for being back here with us. First with you, Congressman Quigley. A lot of voting rights groups are saying, well, what took him so long? Does this speech today give this movement to abolish the filibuster, or at least in this instance for voting rights, any momentum?
I think it does, and he said it right? The opportunity to vote on voting rights legislation is an opportunity to choose between democracy and autocracy. And if you're going to carve out something out of the filibuster or blow it up, it might as well be for something so important as voting rights.
Congresswoman Bustos, what does it say, though, that major voting rights groups, including the candidate for Georgia governor on the Democratic side, Stacey Abrams, decided not to show up for this speech?
You know, I think it's just a way to look at throwing out fault for something. Joe Biden went down to Georgia. He took a whole bunch of our colleagues on Air Force One with him. Stacey Abrams said that she had a scheduling conflict. I think it's much ado about nothing. I think the message that we want to take away from this is just the sacredness of our elections and how we have to get this right. We now have 19 states that have passed more than 30 laws that impact in a real way everything from if you want to pass out water or food when somebody's in a long, hot line in Georgia to something even more sinister, and that is that the Republican lawmakers can actually appoint people to replace the election board so they get the right outcome. That is messing with people's votes. And you think about it, if I go and I vote for Mike Quigley for Congress and he gets the vast majority of the votes, how dare anybody think they can come in and reverse that? But those are the kind of laws that we're dealing with right now.
And I want to get to the specifics of those issues in a bit, but first back to the filibuster, where it's pretty common knowledge that any chance for any of these bills to pass, it would take abolishing the filibuster, at least in this instance. There are many different options for doing it. Congressman Krishnamurthy, what is the most likely option that would have success?
Well, I think that in this particular case, the stakes are so high. The filibuster was primarily used in the Jim Crow era to basically obstruct the rights of people to vote. And it's being used again in precisely that way to basically prevent the John Lewis Voting Rights Act as well as Joe Manchin's Freedom to Vote Act from moving forward. So I think the most likely path here is to basically get the caucus, the Democratic caucus, to unanimously adopt a carve-out in this particular case to allow this particular piece of legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to move forward. I'm hopeful that Joe Manchin would be very supportive of that particular measure.
And it seems like that remains to be seen at this point. Congressman Quigley, let's parse these bills that your colleague was talking about here. First, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act versus Senator Manchin's Freedom to Vote Act. What do these bills do specifically? Look, the thing about John Lewis is it restores some of the key provisions of the Voting Rights Act gutted by the Supreme Court, particularly pre-clearance. The other bill that is referred to as the Manchin bill, it does a whole slew of things addressing dark money, election security, and a long laundry list of just allowing people to get to the voting booth. So, taken together, it's what we have to do. I don't think one of them is enough. And Congresswoman Bustos, you mentioned some of the laws being considered or passed at certain states. How would this bill interact with those laws, a.k.a. would this federal bill, if passed, trump some of the laws being passed in conservative and swing states?
Yeah, the federal laws, if we can pass this, would supersede all of those. And again, just for context, there are 400 state-level bills that have been debated. These 19 states have passed 30-some. So those right now, just within the last year, have become law. So the sense of urgency around President Biden going to Georgia and pounding his fist on the podium is because of that. We have a real sense of urgency because we've got these 19 states that are doing all they can to get in the way of free and fair elections. And as Americans, we all ought to stand up and we all ought to do some shouting just like Joe Biden did today. And Congressman Krishnamurthy, perhaps a more bipartisan route being talked about here is a fix to the Electoral Reform Act, which would prevent a situation like in 2020 where the former president tried to subvert the Electoral College results. Explain to us what the Electoral Reform Act would do.
Basically, the Electoral Reform Act would codify the vice president's merely ceremonial role in certifying the election. As you remember, on January 6th, former President Trump, as well as the insurrectionists, tried to pressure Vice President Pence to basically throw out the results that the voters of 6 states put forward in selecting presidential electors. And so what this Electoral Reform Act would do is basically prevent a future vice president from being able to even do that. But that's not enough. This particular reform that the Republicans are putting forward in the Senate is a start, and it's okay, but we need fundamental changes to prevent what's happening in those 19 states that were referenced before. We need to prevent voter suppression. We need to prevent basically state legislatures from usurping the role of voters in selecting their presidential electors. And we need to do whatever it takes to prevent what was attempted on January 6th, an overturning of a lawful election, from actually being successful.
Congressman Quigley, does the electoral reform have bipartisan support? It would likely have support in your chamber, but in the Senate, could it get 60 votes?
You know, I just doubt it at this point in time. It's unfortunate. We have to look at the past votes to give us the best indication of future ones. You know, I'm concerned that it's going to get enough. And again, it needs to be part of a broader process here. You know, if we're going to protect our democracy, it's going to begin with these laws. And to do that, they're just going to go after the filibuster.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for now. A lot more to get to, but our thanks for now for Representatives Mike Quigley, Sherry Bustos, and Raja Krishnamurthy. And up next, Amanda Vinicky and Speaker of the Illinois House, Emanuel Chris Welch, after 1 year in his new role. So please stay with us.
Thousands of Puerto Ricans are taking to the streets to protest massive blackouts.
Over the years, Mexican culture, from food to music, has become woven into the city's tapestry.
Medical professionals share the latest recommendations on COVID-19 booster shots.
DACA recipients have been facing longer delays than normal in their status renewal.
Little Village is one of my favorite neighborhoods. This neighborhood comes together to celebrate such an important day in our culture.
This week marks 1 year since Emanuel Chris Welch became Illinois House Speaker. Welch's historic win in this followed former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan's decades-long hold on political power in the House. And joining us now to reflect on that moment and what has happened in the years since is Speaker Welch. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So how about that? What is different in this past year? What has changed in Illinois government and specifically in the Illinois House with you at the helm?
Well, you know, I don't want to state the obvious, but, you know, there's been a historic appointment, and me being the first African-American, that's in 203 years for our state. That's a huge significance. But as you know, Amanda, we've talked a lot. You know how different it is in the House with regard to the Speaker's office being very open, accessible, doing the best to be transparent. Democrats on both, members on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, will tell you they've been in the office for the first time. For many of them, had conversations with me and actually got things done. Also, we have term limits in our rules. First time ever. I don't think we've ever considered term limits on a speaker. So those are some significant things that I think are big differences. And if you talk to the rank and file members, they will tell you they see and feel the difference, and they're feeling heard.
So this is the beginning and still of what you've promised will only be as long as a 10-year run as Speaker. Now, you talked about the significance of being the first Black individual to hold that position. How has that materially made a difference in what has been accomplished, what's been done this past year?
Well, I think it's important just to note the significance of it in history. I think it has made a difference to Black boys and girls all across this state. Now that they can see something, they can believe it, they can achieve it. But I also think it's a symbolic that we seize the moment, and we seize the moment in a big way here in this country, where there's been a big call for diversity, equity, inclusion. I've always called for that even before I was Speaker, and here I am today. I think that's a direct result of where we are in our country and our society. But we also seized the moment and got big things done from a policy standpoint. I think timing is everything, and I think that certainly having a new speaker with new energy, we were able to get a lot of those new things done, those big things done.
I want to circle back to that, but just briefly curious, does Madigan pick up the phone ever, give you a call, feedback, advice, and would you want it?
Well, we talked, less than a handful of times last year. It's been a while since the last conversation, but I got to tell you, there's only 4 people alive in Illinois that know what I'm actually going through, and that's myself, Speaker Madigan, George Ryan, and Lee Daniels. And so it's an exclusive club, and to have those conversations with him less than a handful of times, I found him to be very helpful.
You noted that timing is everything, and really some very significant legislation did become law in Illinois under you and with a push from the Black Caucus, including some criminal justice changes that are just beginning to take effect. And yet, of course, this comes as we are seeing a lot of crime in major metropolises, including in Chicago. You've said that there may be some changes coming in that regard to deal with things such as carjackings and also to deal with retail theft. What are you looking to do there?
Amanda, it's pretty early in the session. We've actually only been to Springfield one day in person. We're about to start our virtual hearings this week. Next week, we'll continue those virtual hearings. Conversations are very early in the process, but I do believe that there's going to be an anti-crime agenda that comes out of the General Assembly this spring. We know that carjackings is an issue all across the state. We know that organized retail theft is an issue, so we've had conversations already with the Illinois Retail Merchants Association on a package that we're working on. So there's a lot of big things that we think will get done, but particularly around this area of helping to reduce crime. But I also think we're going to be able to do some things within our budget space that will continue to help us address crime as well. And I do think we have to continue to properly fund our local law enforcement agencies, make sure they have the funding that they need for training and education, like we did in the 2021 budget. We're going to have to continue to build upon that. I mean, there's some policy things we can do, but we have to continue to do things from a budgetary standpoint as well.
Is there anything that you can share with us that, at least in these early conversations even, have been talked about as solutions to carjacking, retail theft? Is it something like longer sentences? The General Assembly has been moving in the opposite of that, trying to bring the prison population down. Is that part of it?
Well, it's very early on, Amanda. I don't want to get into specifics yet because I don't want to get locked into anything in particular, but Chairman Slaughter in the House, Chairman Sims in the Senate, they're leading the efforts, and in the coming days and weeks, you will be getting more specifics on those things, but do know that those are some issues that are top of mind. Crime is not just an issue in the state of Illinois, it's an issue all over the country. And I think that we have to step up and address those issues that are affecting everyday people. People shouldn't worry about carjackings and retail theft. And there's some answers that we can bring forward.
We're certainly eager to hear whatever you've got coming, so please do share. You talked about the budget. What of that? What are your priorities as we're about a month out from the governor giving his proposal?
Boy, I tell you, I can't believe we're in year 3 of COVID-19, and not only are we in year 3, but we're in the midst of a surge of COVID-19. And so certainly our budget has to be a top priority again. I think we're going to have to continue to address COVID-19. Thankfully, we didn't spend all of the ARPA money, and we're going to be able to allocate some of the ARPA dollars to continue to help people pay their rent, pay their mortgages, to continue to put a roof over their head, to continue to help our small businesses stay open. We're going to be able to do some things in our budget space because of our responsible use of dollars last year. And so I want to build on that, continue to recognize that we're in the midst of a global pandemic. It hasn't gone anywhere. And so we're going to have to continue to help people as best we can.
A rare position for Illinois to be in terms of having some dollars to spare or perhaps play around with. When you mention the COVID pandemic, what action do you believe the General Assembly needs to take along that vein, particularly as we still see, for example, court cases going forward, trying to say that without an actual law, the governor doesn't have authority to implement things like a mask mandate in schools or vaccination mandates?
Well, I think the General Assembly has already taken action in the last veto session. We took action with regard to the Healthcare Right of Conscience Act. But from our standpoint, I think the biggest space that we can be helpful in is the budget space. we have to recognize that COVID-19 is wreaking havoc on families with regard to child care issues, people that actually get laid off from their jobs, unemployment issues. We're going to have to address the unemployment insurance fund. There's a lot of things in our budget space that we're going to have to do to continue to recognize the realities of living in a global pandemic that Democrats in the legislature have done. We did it in 2021. We're going to continue to do that here in 2022. And I'm hoping that my colleagues on the other side will join us in our efforts to continue to help people.
And of course, all of that with 2022 also, least not forget, an election year with all members of the Illinois House who are running for re-election, including yourself, up and on that ballot. On that note, stay well, and thank you so much, House Speaker Chris Welch.
Amanda, thank you. You be well as well.
Thanks. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, with the Omicron COVID variant overwhelming hospitals, local Congress members weigh in on what the president can do to ease the crunch. News anchor Pat Cassidy just retired after 51 years behind the microphone. Reflections on his long career and that early alarm clock. And we introduce you to a 90-year-old local writer who's taking on limericks one rhyme at a time. But first, some more of today's top stories. Employees at one of Chicago's most prominent arts institutions vote to form a union. Workers at the Art Institute voted to unionize by a 142 to 44 vote. Eligible employees, ranging from curators and custodians to mailroom staff and retail workers, will officially be represented by the new Art Institute of Chicago Workers United. The National Labor Relations Board has certified the union of more than 250 workers. Illinois officials are launching a new campaign to encourage vaccinations amid the current surge of COVID cases. The initial rollout of the campaign is featuring stories from people who were initially hesitant to get vaccinated.
Went on a trip to take in my nephew's wedding. That resulted in my wife passing, resulted in me being in the hospital for 3 weeks. If we had have received the vaccination prior to contracting COVID, I am fully confident that things would have came out differently.
And the campaign is launched as Illinois public health officials report more than 28,000 new COVID cases and 92 additional deaths. The state has seen more than 2,488,000 COVID cases since the pandemic began, with 28,660 total deaths. Also, the state's test positivity rate is 16.9%. Additionally, the city of Chicago distributed 1.5 million KN95 masks to aldermanic offices this morning. The masks are being made available to constituents and community groups. Officials say they will reach every community. Residents or groups interested in these masks should contact their aldermanic office for details. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Early in the program, we discussed voting rights bills, and now we're joined again by Representatives Mike Quigley, Sherry Bustos, and Raja Krishnamurthy. Again, we've invited all of the Republicans in Illinois' congressional delegation to join our conversation tonight, but none accepted. We do, again, thank you all for joining us here again. And let's start a discussion with COVID. Health officials from the CDC, FDA, and NIH testified on Capitol Hill today about the explosion of Omicron. Please take a look.
I think it's hard to process what's actually happening right now, which is most people are going to get COVID. All right, and what we need to do is make sure the hospitals can still function, transportation, other essential services are not disrupted while this happens.
And Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, do you agree with that sentiment there from Dr. Woodcock that the sentiment now is most people are just going to get COVID?
Well, I worked in healthcare for 10 years of my career, although I worked in communications in healthcare. So certainly I'm not any medical expert, but let me tell you what we're seeing in the congressional district that I represent. It's a mostly rural district, but we have three bigger markets. We have Rockford, Peoria, and the Quad Cities. In Rock Island County, which is where I live, it's only a population of about 140,000. We had 676 cases late last week in 2 days. So we are now to the point where our hospital, one of our hospitals up in Rockford, is no longer taking elective surgeries. We have another hospital that every one of the ICU beds is taken up. Look, I worked with so many doctors and nurses over my decade in healthcare. And I still keep in touch with many of them. They are worn out. There's a little bit of this backstory of kind of this, you don't go in healthcare unless you're an empathetic type person. And now there's this talk about an empathy deficit because everybody is just so worn out. And the message is, get your vaccination, get your booster, wear your mask, use your hand sanitizer. It is like the basics are all there. And we cannot continue to stress our healthcare system beyond its seams, and that's where we are right now.
And we certainly have heard those same sentiments from healthcare officials in recent weeks. Congressman Krishnamurthy, part of the Biden plan is to send up to 8 at-home tests to all Americans to have reimbursed by insurance. So when a constituent comes to you and asks you, how do I get my hands on a test and will it be free, what is your answer to them?
The answer is that it will be free and that you will receive these tests. Of course, right now, people are trying to get tests and they're having a hard time, honestly. They're not able to access these rapid tests at their local pharmacies. They're not able to get the PCR tests back quickly enough to make judgments about, whether they should isolate or how do they approach their affairs at work and so forth. And so I think those plans to get tests are going to be very useful, especially as we deal with future variants. Right now, I think the most important thing is, as Sherry alluded to, making sure that you get your vaccinations, get your boosters, and then you isolate and quarantine as necessary. My wife happens to be a physician, and 50% of her patients are COVID positive right now in the hospital. And so this is extremely nerve-wracking for folks. And I think we just have to, at this point, play it safe and make sure that everyone tries to stay out of the hospital. And vaccinations are the best way to do that. Congressman
Quigley, does there need to be more of a federal response beyond just sending tests? For instance, sending more federal assistance to hospitals.
Sure, the hospitals are going to need it. Our caregivers are going to need it. Schools and other institutions are going to need it to put systems in place to protect everyone. But the bottom line is still back to vaccinations. Unvaccinated people are 6 times more likely to test positive, 9 times more likely to be hospitalized, 14 times more likely to die from COVID. So, we're probably going to be with COVID for a long time. And a large part of that reason is the fact that there are still people out there who refuse to be vaccinated.
Congressman Quigley, I'll stick with you here because there are a bunch of Chicago public schools in your congressional district. Do you agree with the mayor and President Biden that those students need to be in school despite the wave of Omicron right now?
They need to be in school, but we need protections in place. Part of that has to do with getting kids vaccinated and putting all the other systems, including screening and protective equipment out there to protect the teachers, the staff, and of course the kids.
And is there more federal assistance on its way for those initiatives?
Well, I don't know exactly where CPS is with the assistance they already got. But we need to make sure they have everything they need to get the job done.
All right, I want to talk a little bit of politics. Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, 24 House Democrats announced they're retiring next year. That you're among those Democrats. Does that say that it's going to be very difficult for Democrats to keep the House?
No, I think it says that, I can speak for myself. I've been in office, it'll be 5 terms by the time I'm done. It'll be 10 years, a full decade. And for me, it's just on to my next chapter. I am not by any means abandoning ship. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the seat that I've represented since 2013 is represented by somebody who's great. And we've got some wonderful candidates. And I think as you look at the others, it's either people wanting to move on to their next chapter in life, people who want to spend time with their grandkids, people who want more family time, or people who are just ready for something else. But look, I think I ran the political arm of House Democrats for the previous cycle, and it takes all kinds of strategy to be successful at the ballot box. But I'm confident that we're going to have great candidates running all over this country. And, we just have to gear up for that. We've got basically about 10-ish months to go before that November election. And, I think we're going to be ready for it.
And Congressman, that is going to be a slightly different district because of some of the redrawn maps there. Congressman Krishnamurthy, the president's approval ratings aren't very high relatively right now. What do you think Democrats have to do in the next 10 months to make sure that they don't lose the House or the Senate?
Well, I think what we have to do is deliver for the American people. We have to get things done. Obviously, we've been talking about BBB, but as I said the other day, I think we need to get into GGG, get governance going. Whatever components of that particular bill that we can actually pass and get signed into law, whether it's prescription drug price reforms, universal preschool, or expanded child tax credits, we need to get that done because my constituents want it. We also need to tackle inflation and, of course, COVID and the other kitchen table topics that people are discussing every day.
And Congressman Quigley, are there any of those singular components of that Build Back Better bill that have momentum on their own right now?
If I had to read into what the Senate's doing, I'm just not sure. I mean, they're all important to me. I mean, obviously climate change, the tax credit for kids is going to run out. The child tax credit's going to run out now. This is the last week that's there. That lifted half of America's children out of poverty. That's extraordinarily important. But let me just address what you just asked. The bottom line is we can't be defeatist. There's a lot to talk about. We're still trying to pass Build Back Better, but we passed a generational infrastructure bill, and we're going to start seeing the benefits of that in March as the cranes go up and construction begins on rebuilding our country.
And the debate ramps up now on voting rights, among other things, and we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to Representatives Mike Quigley, Sherry Bustos, and Raja Krishnamurthy. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ferris.
Thank you.
And up next, a look back at the storied career of a local radio anchor who's signing off after 51 years. But first, we take a look at the weather.
After 51 years as a radio news anchor, Pat Cassidy has signed off. For most of the last 22 years, Cassidy hosted mornings on WBBM News Radio, holding the #1 spot in the ratings for most of that time as well. Before that, he spent 25 years at the former WMAQ AM. In the host chair, Cassidy covered everything from historic elections to highway closures. And his roots in radio go all the way back to college. And Pat Cassidy joins us now. Pat, it is good to see you. You and I actually worked together some 8 years ago when I was new to Chicago at WBBM News Radio as well. And congratulations.
Well, thank you, Brad. It's good to see you again. It has been 8 years. Wow.
A lot can happen in 8 years.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Solid reporter, a solid anchor, and you're doing great now, and good for you.
Thank you so much, and good for you as well. You know, you wrapped up your career with WBBM at the end of last year. How are you sleeping in the mornings now?
Well, not too good, frankly. I still wake up at 2:30 in the morning, wide awake, and I've got a little game I play with myself, and I read a book, and I get back to sleep all right. But 51 years at 2:30 a.m., I guess that's my entire adult life. I guess my body clock's going to take a little while to get adjusted, so I'm going to have to give it some time. That'll probably be one of my biggest challenges.
Yeah, something to keep working on. You've got the time to do it now. So you first got into radio in college. How did that come to be?
Well, I was in college first day, actually, getting to know my roommate in the dorm, and my major was journalism. In high school, the high school paper, and then college, and that was always been my interest in journalism. And the student director of the radio station stuck his head in the room and says, "Who's talking there?" I said, "Me." So he said, "I'm the college radio station manager. You got a great voice. How'd you like to be a DJ?" Well, I don't know anything about that. He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, all you do is play rock and roll, and girls call you on the phone all night." I said, "Well, I think I'll give that a try. and I did, and married journalism with it. And, Lord blessed me with a nice voice, and I was kind of a natural, and it's took off from there.
And here you are. You worked at a few different local stations before spending 25 years as morning news anchor at WMAQ AM. So many huge stories that you covered in that time, including the election of Harold Washington, of course. What are your memories of that time?
Well, I think probably one of my great memories starting off was the country music days on WMAQ. I was the newsman. We did a morning show called The Good Morning Guys with Lee Sherwood was the host. And Tim Weigel was our sports guy, and Jerry Tapp was our weatherman. It was Tim Weigel's first broadcast job was with us, and Jerry Tapp, one of his first radio jobs. And we had a great program. We got great ratings. I did the news, and it was kind of a lot of humor and so on and so forth. And the news was always there for me, and covered stories accordingly. And then it became kind of a talk station. Worked with Mort Downey Jr. and Drew Hayes, and then it was sold to Westinghouse. That was NBC. It was sold to Westinghouse in 1988. It became WMAQ All News, traffic and weather together on the ones. And the stories, well, just think about the things that have happened since 1975. I think certainly one of the biggest things, story-wise, was 9/11. That was, of course, in 2001 at WBBM. I was working with Felicia Middlebrooks at the time, my co-anchor for most of my time at BBM. And, it started off, we took turns. Somebody runs the board, the equipment, the other person kind of sits in the anchor chair. And I happened to be running the board that day in anchoring. And we got the editor said, well, we got a plane. It looks like a small plane, maybe a suicide hit a building in New York, but let's switch to it. We got a picture, visual. And remember, we're getting this really before social media even existed. And before we're the fastest medium at that point. And we saw right away that it was the World Trade Center. It was a big plane, and the weather was perfect, and something was not right. And, the rest is history. And I think probably, and I'm very proud of this, Felicia and I really kept our emotions in check. It was hard because, we're human beings too, and Americans, and we're seeing this carnage and chaos. And everyone on the Kennedy Expressway and Eisenhower and Dan Ryan, they have us as their eyes. So we had to keep it calm. We had to keep it cool because you don't want their anchor saying, oh, my God, because it will cause a panic. So we kept it cool and calm. And I remember saying, ladies and gentlemen, those trademark World Trade Center towers aren't there anymore. And it was a very powerful moment. It chokes me up even to this day. But we got through it. And, I'll tell you what. It was a powerful day. We got through it, and I'm very proud of how we handled that. But that was certainly the biggest story that we covered in my entire career, and hopefully there won't be another one like it.
And certainly as journalists, we know that we have that front seat to history and are witnesses to history, as many of us were that day. Quickly, when you talked about that move from WMAQ to WBBM News Radio, beginning that, that long time sharing of the microphone with Felicia Middlebrooks, any bumps in that transition, switching over?
No, I think for me, I had to remember to say WBBM and not WMAQ, which I've done for 25 years, and say, traffic and weather together on the 8s versus on the 1s, which I'd done for 13 years there. But learning a different format, learning a different clock, and just our roles. As she was the senior anchor, of course. I was the new kid, so to speak, even though I was certainly not a kid. But we worked together quite well almost right away. And then she retired a few years ago, and I was doing the program solo. But always signed on at 5:05 with my trademark By the Dawn's Early Light.
Another
Pat Cassidy, By the Dawn's Early Light. And I think the audience really became very accustomed to that sign on at 5:05 a.m.
Well, something else I enjoyed hearing from you a little bit later on in the morning, you would say, good morning, breakfast lovers.
Good morning, breakfast lovers.
Which was always a good
That was a
one as well.
takeoff of Don McNeil's Breakfast Club at the Alamo Hotel. He said breakfast clubbers. So I kind of spun it into breakfast lovers, because I was a big fan of that program back in the day. So that's where that came from.
Well, it made me hungry because I wanted some breakfast. But Pat, will you miss covering those breaking news stories?
Absolutely. That will probably be the number one thing. I mean, even this morning, or the other morning, I should say, when the Bears let Nagy and Pace go, that was a breaking story that happened in Morning Drive. How did I missed it? But there's something about breaking news that has just always, my respiration goes up, my heart rate goes up, and I just like breaking news. Big stuff, small. They close an expressway for an accident. I get all worked up because I'm telling people and they're hearing it for the first time. And that connection with people. And that's really what it's all about for me is the audience, listening to what they say, listening to what they have to, their impact and the relationship with them. And that's always been about the audience for me all along.
And Pat, before we let you go, what would you tell someone who's thinking of getting into radio news?
Well, I would say learn all you can learn about every type of news, and don't be a one-trick pony. Don't just know a certain type of news. Learn sports, learn weather, learn news, different types of news, national news, international news. Read a lot, and stay on top of things. And of course, social media has changed the whole paradigm too. But beware of social media. Make sure things are vetted and before you put it on the air. So I would say that. Read a lot too.
Absolutely. Pat Cassidy, an honor and a pleasure. Enjoy the days of, hanging with the grandkids and the golfing and the fishing, and best of luck. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brandis.
And now, Paris, back to you.
Great career. Thanks, Brandis. Jay Shefsky first introduced us to Bindi Bitterman on Chicago Tonight some years ago in a visit to her Evanston-based antique store. Well, the now 90-year-old has since closed up shop and taken on a new creative outlet rooting in rhyming words. Arts correspondent Angel Ito tells us how her latest venture came to be.
Skiddly diddly scat.
That's the name of Bindi Bitterman's new children's limerick book.
I never intended to write a children's. That was a pure accident. Somehow the phrase skiddly diddly scat came into my head. And I thought, oh, little kids would love that. They would say skiddly diddly scat like a nursery rhyme. So I just wrote some limericks about a mouse and a cat, and they got into trouble in a laundromat, and they get thrown into a washer, and they got switched. And they come out, and the mouse says, meow, and the cat goes, eek, like a mouse, like I think a mouse would.
Bitterman says her joy for writing limericks came after subscribing to Wordsmith's AWOD, or A Word a Day challenges. She would write a limerick around an uncommon word and often win Best Limerick in their daily contests.
There's always 5 lines. It doesn't have to be the same, but the first, the second, and the fifth should have the same number of syllables. The third and fourth are da 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 da, da 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 da, or da 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 da. It's got to be. There are rules.
So when the phrase skiddly diddly scat came to mind, she started writing, and before she knew it, she had created a book.
At 90 years old, and fortunately I'm okay financially and hopefully for the rest of my life. The book is $20. I'm not going to make any money on the book, and that's okay. I'm not doing it to make money. People are stopping me and saying, I gave this to my grandson or nephew or my friend, and they just love it. That's thanks enough.
And with the help of a QR code, folks can even hear Bitterman read the story herself.
Just because cats don't even think twice. They just always eat mice. Everyone knows all those natural laws.
But creating it was one thing, and people seemed to love it. I mean, I sold out the whole initial printing of 300 before Christmas this year. I can't compare myself to Dr. Seuss. People who really get off on Dr. Seuss can be any age. And I think that's what people are doing with this. I'm so proud of it now because I think it looks so good and sounds so good. It's a good limerick, well illustrated, and people love it. So what more do you need? Because they realized how they weren't enemies now and let skiddly diddly skedaddle.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And you can visit our website for more information on how to get your paws on a copy of Skiddly Diddly Scat. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And of course, you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. After 5 days of canceled classes, CPS students are set to return to school. Our Spotlight Politics team on that and more.
And Israeli researchers teach a goldfish how to drive. Rabia Mayas on that and other stories making headlines from the world of science. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.